Good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in for another US in the City interview. This time with a very special guest indeed, Lord Stuart Polak, who we're very grateful to have with us this evening. Thank you so much, Stuart, for joining us. And before we begin, I'd just like to send a message out there on behalf of our community. If there are, people who have connections to the conflict currently in the Ukraine, we just want to send our thoughts and prayers to you and say that we are thinking of you and praying for you. My family have connections to Ukraine, and there's a lot going on in my family, so just wanted to wish all of you well and pray for your safety. So without any further ado then, welcome, Lord Polak.
Thank you very much, and I echo your words about Ukraine and about this very sad time. My son actually reminded me about 4 years ago when we were in Ukraine, and I spent 3 or 4 days going around Jewish schools and seeing the community growing. And I recall he reminded me that on the Friday night, I think I met the fourth rabbi. Each one had told me each one was the chief rabbi of Ukraine. But we had Friday night dinner in his home, and there was 10 or 12 people around the table. And he reminded me, and I'd forgotten, that we were introduced to a youngish guy who they said was a comedian and was standing to become president. And we met him that Friday night 3 or 4 years ago. So I echo your words and hope that peace will come quick.
Amen. Yes, thank you. So I really wanted to have a fireside conversation. We were actually going to do this physically in the same room, but of course you had very important business at the House of Lords in the upper chamber in terms of some votes that went on today. So we're doing this online, separated by the Thames or whatever it might be. And but I really wanted to get into the fireside chat despite the geographical distance between us. And I wanted to ask you, Stuart, about your childhood, because I know that we have a great shared passion for Liverpool Football Club. We were both at Wembley last Sunday, and we both shared our clips of us singing "You'll Never Walk Alone." But I know that you are from that part of the country. Please, could you tell our audience a bit about your background, about your childhood memories?
Oh, sure. And of course, Sunday was great. I mean, the Carabao Cup is very important for us because, of course, it's a Sunday, so we can actually get to the final if we get there. So it was a great occasion. Sure. I mean, I come from a family, the parents, older brother, younger sister, in born and bred in Liverpool, educated at King David School, which is certainly in my day and still today, a great school to have gone to. The community was very Zionistic. It was a small community, but I spent most of my teenage years in what was called Harold House. For those who anyone up the north will remember the community centre that we had there. And we were very lucky because Liverpool, a small community, we had everything that we needed as kids, and being very sporty. From the 8-minute walk from my home to the shul, or 7-minute walk from my home to the school, and the school and the shul and the youth club were all on one block in Liverpool, in Dunbabin Road, and this was something. And actually, on the way to school, you had to pass the Jewish tennis club, and if you got on the right bus, you could be at the Jewish golf club. We had everything growing up, and sport playing a big part of all our lives. And then, of course, in those days, because of Shabbat, I went to as many midweek games as possible, mainly in Europe, and the European games. It's funny because, of course, today there's hardly any game that plays 3 o'clock on a Shabbat afternoon, but in those days, everything. So as we were very Zionistic, very committed to the community, being involved, and as soon as I could, I got involved in the youth service. We were encouraged. parents encouraged us to learn to daven, learn to leyen, and take your part in the community. I then spent time at the youth club, and when I was like 14, 15, I was looking after the 12-year-olds, and we had great, and that's how I got into youth work. So Liverpool was and still is, but it was a great start in life for a committed member of the community.
And so after high school at King David, what happened next?
Well, interestingly, I wasn't sure what I actually wanted to do. And there was a great, the headmaster of the King David Primary School at the time was John Weiner, who, passed away a number of years, but was a great headmaster of the school. And he knew I was quite interested in this sort of informal education. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I started off at Manchester University studying Hebrew and Arabic. And to this day, actually, I wish I'd continued doing Hebrew and Arabic for different reasons to where I've got to and what I'm doing today. However, he and I were chatting, and he said to me, look, he's got a vacancy, and would I like to come and do teaching of Jewish studies and some sport and see if I liked teaching. So I actually left Manchester University quite quickly and then went to teach in King David Primary School, the school that I'd been in. And then I went on to do teacher training, but I was more into informal education and youth work, which is what I then came down to London to do back in 1984.
Wow. And was that in Edgware?
Absolutely. It was very funny. I mean, it was a United Synagogue job. And I remember there were two jobs going at the time. There was one in Hendon and one in Edgware. And I have to be honest, I'd never heard of Edgware. And my sister had just moved to London a few months before me, and she was living in Hendon. So I, of course, asked for the Hendon job, and they gave me the Edgware one. But I did find my way to Edgware, and I had a great time there for a year running working for the United Synagogue.
Yeah. So really your formative years were characterized by really a love of reaching out to the community and building the Jewish life of youngsters who had grown up in your vicinity. I guess the next crop coming up, and you felt the passion to inspire them and to lead
Well,
them.
it was interesting because naturally we would have been the sort of B'nai Akiva group within the, and my sister was very much in B'nai Akiva, but I took a different turn, and I worked within the youth club amongst the not particularly religious community and tried to inspire that way, and did some training. They did some leadership training at Harold House, and that's really what got me on this road of leadership. But it was more looking outward rather than inward.
Right. Okay. So I guess after those years, the Hebrew and Arabic paused, or and taking a new course to do this youth work. Now down in London.
Yeah.
You must have been in your early 20s at this stage.
Yeah, I was in my early 20s. So I came in 84, so I was 22, 23. I took a flat in Edgware opposite Diane Lopian, who I had a lot of time for, a lot of respect for, and lived there in Edgware. Yeah, no, it was great, and got to. I mean, I knew nobody really in London when I came down, partly because most of them couldn't understand what I was saying. It was, no, it was a great opportunity. It was those days. It's funny because Edgware in those days, the three sort of Orthodox shuls got together. It was the United, the Assuran, and the Adas got together. I mean, now there's a shul on every corner in Edgware, but those were the three main shuls, and they sort of employed me as the youth and community worker in Edgware back in 1984, which I did for just a year or so. That's all.
Okay. So after that year, a new chapter arose in your
Yeah,
story?
it was actually interesting. Some people remember there was this issue that people were hanging around on a Saturday night at Edgware Station, and people were getting sort of worked up about it. And as the sort of youth worker during the summer, and it was still Shabbat, and we were trying to work out what to do. And I remember going to meet the Board of Deputies at the time. I think Greville Janner was the president, and others, and we were going to talk about detached youth work of rather than trying to force young people into a place that they didn't want to go, but how you would go and do work within the station and others. And we were looking at doing projects, and it was a meeting actually there where the Clive Lawton, who was the previous education director, had actually gone up to Liverpool to become head of King David, my old school. And I'd come down here, and I then took on the job as education director of the Board of Deputies from 1984 till 89, for about 4 or 5 years.
Oh, so now you're at the board.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I guess that was a graduation of the kind, because that would have been a more, I guess, a more political role, or
Well, not rather than political, what it was doing, and most of my time was split into two. One was to looking after the rights of the community within the educational system. So there was a legal sort of aspect within Parliament. So things like examinations, A levels on Shavuot, issues of that nature. And the other part, which I enjoyed thoroughly, which was representing Judaism and in schools. So I was teaching RE teachers who were teaching world religions in all sorts of places all over the UK, and it would sort of make your hair stand on end when you found at that time what they were teaching in the name of Judaism. So I would go and lecture and do programs about how they could teach to their non-Jewish children Judaism in a better way. So I would do a lot of programs through tours, through Shabbat meals, through Seder meals, through all sorts of activities to try and teach Judaism to the non-Jewish teachers teaching their non-Jewish children. So it was an outside role. Fascinating.
wow. And that was for 4 years you were doing this?
Yeah, I did that for 4 or 5 years, and I had a illness in the middle of that, and I wasn't sure which way to turn. We were just about got married, and we were about to have a family, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then I was approached then by 3 or 4 leading businessmen in the community, and they said to me, we think you would be very good to run the Conservative Friends of Israel. And I said, well, that's really interesting, but I've never been to Parliament. And I don't know much about, I'm not a member of the Conservative Party, and so on. And I remember that they all said, oh, you'll learn that. And we think you should do this. And the rest is history. I took on that role back in 1989. And to this day, I'm the honorary president of Conservative Friends of Israel.
Wow. And so that becomes a political role.
Yeah.
And so you left the board, went to Conservative Friends of Israel. Were there any highlights, outstanding anecdotes, or moments that
Well,
you
I
can
remember the
remember
first
now?
moment. These businessmen were clearly, and they were senior businessmen at the time, and they knew exactly what they were doing. they said to me that we will donate each of them £10,000 to get you going. Now, £10,000 today is a lot of money. Back in 1989, £10,000 from each for £40,000 was great. And I said fine. And I remember going in on the first day. There was an office in Paddington, and I opened the door and I had a look at the books, and there was a £39,500 overdraft. So these guys who knew exactly what they were doing had left me with 500 quid and said, go and build and go and do it. But what they did do was introduce me to people. I remember that within 3 weeks, I had my first trip to Israel of the leadership of, there were 4 members of parliament, senior, who were going to Israel. And I remember distinctly going to a meeting with the then Prime Minister Shamir. And we were sitting around in his office, and each of the members of parliament asked a question. And then they turned to me as if, and I had time in my mind to think, why does the Prime Minister of Israel need to answer a question from me? Because this was all like, oh my gosh, this is all a bit new and so on. And I did ask a question, but if you ask me what it was, I can't remember at this stage, and I certainly can't remember the answer. But that was a good start, and I built and continue to build the organisation, which has gone from strength to strength in building those closer relationships between Britain and Israel.
And so you were running that organisation for a few years before.
Oh, I was the director right up until 2015. I was able then. They kindly allowed me to do some private business, and I have some other interests and so on. But I ran the Conservative Friends of Israel until I went into the House of Lords. And that was interesting in a way, because when David Cameron invited me to go to the Lords, one of the things he said to me when he called to invite me to go on the list, he said, and I hope you will continue to stand up for Israel. This was his words, to stand up for Israel in the House of Lords. So of course, it was a great honour. What he didn't realise, and I didn't realise, but of course, I couldn't be the paid director of Conservative Friends of Israel and speak up for Israel. You couldn't tie the two. So I retired as the director and became the president. So it enables, and so I didn't get paid. I gave up the job, as it were, and I'm able to speak up for Israel and certainly community matters, which I do regularly in the House today.
So how did the peerage come about?
Well, I know how to lobby. I lobbied for Israel a long time, but I didn't lobby for this, and it was a bit of a surprise. It was after the 2015 election. Seems a long time ago, when David Cameron won a majority after the coalition of 2010 to 2015, and it was a Sunday morning when the mobile phone was going, and it was the Prime Minister inviting me to go on the list. That's how it came about.
Wow. And where were you living during all this
well,
time?
we had been in Edgware, as I say, in those early years, and we got married and we were in Edgware. But when we wanted to move to a house, we could. In those days, Boreham Wood was a little cheaper, and we moved to Boreham Wood. Lived right opposite the shul in Croxdale Road, in our first house. And it was about 1988 we moved to Boreham Wood, and we've been there ever since. And anybody who's listening might be watching Boreham Wood trying to beat Everton tonight. That would be good too.
Yeah, as a Liverpudlian,
Absolutely,
we're rooting for the Wood tonight.
Oh, big time.
And so you were married, had a family, moved to Boreham Wood, settled down, but you also in the business world.
Yeah, I was fortunate that the guys, those businessmen, allowed me to do other things to augment my to be able to look after the family, and so I got involved in the insurance world back in the early 90s through a member of parliament, actually. And I've had consultancies and one or two other things that I still maintain today.
When I speak to you, and I had a sabbatical recently, and I used to hang out in Boreham Wood Shul quite a bit during that time. And of course, between Aliyahs, we would sometimes exchange a few words. And and indeed, every time we speak, you're always doing a new project somewhere in some crazy part of the world, or some completely unexpected project, whether it's in the Gulf, Africa. Can you give us some examples of some of the highly interesting work you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, one of them came about actually through people, and people will know of my work with Benjamin Pearl. Benjamin Pearl, who of course is the maven and the brilliant, well, just a brilliant man who's brought Jewish education onto the map into the UK, and I did some work with him because education was something very important. I was very involved in the establishment of Hertsmere Jewish Prime School, which you know well in your patch, and I worked very much with the late Stanley Cohen to give us the land and work. So the schools were important to me, and Yavne College and Yavne Primary. I was very involved in the inception of those schools. And it was one day when Benjamin Pearl said to me, he said, in our road in Goodyears in Hendon, he said, there lives the Deputy High Commissioner of Tanzania. I said, oh, very good. He said, would you like to meet him? So I said, I'll meet him. So I went to the Pillar and we had breakfast, and I met him. And in the middle of this 1 hour breakfast, the Deputy High Commissioner said that they're thinking, Tanzania, of opening diplomatic relations with Israel. So at the end of the breakfast, I said, it was great to meet you, but I said, are you serious about wanting to do diplomatic relations with Israel? And he said, well, maybe a consulate, we're not sure, it's expensive. I said, that's really interesting to me. He said, well, next week, he said, in the House of Commons, will be my boss, the foreign minister of Tanzania. Would you like to meet him? So I said, okay, I'll meet him. I met him for 5 minutes. And in that 5 minutes, I said to, he was a great man, sadly passed away not so long ago, Augustine Mahiga. And I said to him, are you serious about wanting to open relations with Israel? He said, he gave me the same, maybe it's just a small, maybe a consulate, I'm not sure. So I said, look, I'm going to Israel for Pesach. This was like the February. I'm going to Israel for Pesach. Let me find out from the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and I'll come back to you. So I worked with the ambassador here, and I asked for the Mr. Africa to come from the Foreign Ministry, who came to see me over Pesach. And I said, tell me about Tanzania. He went, Tanzania? Tanzania? He said, that's the Prime Minister's #1 target. So I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, we don't have great political connections. So I said, look, I can't tell you this guy is my friend. I've met him for 5 minutes, but if you want me to go and play, I'll go and play. So I come back to London, and some will remember in 2015, in May 2015, there was an anti-corruption conference in London, and Mahiga, the foreign minister, was coming. So I had arranged to have breakfast with him. And I said to him, Augustine, I said, are you still up for this opening an embassy in Israel? And he said, well, I don't know. It's maybe a consulate. I said, no, you listen to me. I said, I had no diplomatic training whatsoever. So I said, I said, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, basically the countries around him. I said, they all have embassies in Israel. I said, and if you open up a consulate, you'll be a second-class citizen amongst your own peoples. He said, we must have an embassy. So I said, yeah, but one more thing. And then this ties into school, actually, and ties in. I said to him, on the 4th of July coming up, so this was 2016, must have been. Yes, 2016. I said, on the 4th of July, in a few weeks' time, I said, it will be not just American Independence Day, it will be the 40th anniversary of Entebbe. And I said to him, do you remember what happened? And this is a good lesson, because things that are close to us and we remember, we sort of expect everybody to remember them, to know these things. And he had to think for a minute, and he went, Idi Amin. I said, yes, you remember. And the Israelis came and they were able to bring them out. And oh yes, I remember. I said, one of the Israelis was killed. And he said, no, I didn't know. I said, he was the commander. And I said, his name was Yoni Netanyahu. And he looked at me, went, I said, yes, the prime minister's brother. I said, and 40 years on the 4th of May, he will be coming to Entebbe for a ceremony to remember his brother. And then I said, there will be a summit between the Israeli prime minister and 7 African presidents talking about security and stuff. So I looked at him and I said to him, if you can bring me a letter from your president to say that you will open an embassy in Israel, I'll make that meeting 7 presidents and 1 foreign minister. He said to me, you can do that? And in my head, I went, I haven't a clue. But I said, sure. Anyway, to cut a story short, it's exactly what happened. And I was privileged to be in Entebbe when the El Al plane arrived, bringing the prime minister to the ceremony. And I was sitting there and being part of the ceremony. And the reason I was there was because I'd arranged with the foreign minister that he would be the day before, which was a Sunday, at a hotel, and the Israelis will meet him and get the letter and agree it. And about a week, 10 days before the 10 days before the event, I got a call from on my mobile from Mahiga, the foreign minister, and I said, "Have you got your letter?" He said, "Yeah, you know where to be on the 3rd of July." Yes. He said, "Stuart, we're not going to do it." So I said, "What do you mean you're not going to do it?" He said, "We're not going to do it unless you come and introduce us to the Israelis." So I said, you don't understand. You don't need me. It's all done. Everything's fixed. Stuart, you don't understand. You don't come. We're not doing it. So I said, it's all very fair. Anyway, I went. But being Shomer Shabbat, anybody listening who's ever been to Entebbe Airport, to get there from London, in the end, I went on a Thursday I went to Nairobi because I'd seen that there was a shul near in Nairobi. I'd be there for Shabbat, and I got the Israelis to pick me up. Fateful day that day, I left to go to Nairobi because in the morning, because it was just after all the debacle of the David Cameron resigning over the EU referendum. And on the day that I flew, that Thursday morning, Boris Johnson was going to be the new prime minister. By the time I landed in Nairobi, Boris was not going to be prime minister. And it was, if everyone remembers that was that day. And so I was there at that ceremony, and the upshot was that Tanzania have now an embassy in Israel. And this had nothing to do with me, but it's a lovely story. When the ambassador of Tanzania went to present his credentials to President Rivlin, as it was, at the end, and I repeat, nothing to do with me, the guy put on a big white kippah, and he ended up by saying, Shehechiyanu v'kiyamanu v'giyanu lasman hazeh. Amazing. Great story.
That's awesome. And I think you've been very active in the Gulf as well, haven't you, in terms of the Abraham Accords?
Interestingly, I wasn't part of what I called the gold rush when 70,000 Israelis piled in immediately after the Abraham Accords. I'm quite convinced that the Abraham Accords are vitally important and are a game changer for Israel. And so much so, Lord Mendelsohn, John Mendelsohn, and I set up a UK Friends of the Abraham Accords, where we the three initial ambassadors, so Bahrain, Israel, and UAE, invited Liam Fox, former cabinet minister, to be the chairman of this group. And the reason we set that up was really to try and move the Foreign Office and others on from being a bit mealy-mouthed about the Abraham Accords because it was Trump. Therefore, it's not so important. We just believed it was vitally, as I said just now, a game changer. And I have subsequently been out to been out to the UAE 2 or 3 times. I mean, I was with my wife over New Year, and I had to pinch myself that the UAE ambassador to London and his wife took us out for dinner in a black kosher restaurant in Dubai. All the work that's done for Israel and stuff over the years, you do have to pinch yourself a little bit that was real, and it is real. And the train has left the station, and it's positive. So we're trying to continue to encourage that and encourage things. And it is running, and it's running. So that's exciting. And you're right. I've done a little bit more work in Africa too, which is Africa sort of gets into your blood, and it's fascinating. And I'm due out into Djibouti again in a couple of weeks' time, actually.
Do you have any insights into what you've been able to achieve in these African nations?
Well, the Tanzania one I referred to earlier. I've been doing quite a bit in Rwanda over a period of time, and Rwanda has a close relationship with Israel. I mean, a lot of this is for me is trying to help and move those Israel things on, and similarly with Djibouti. I mean, I went a couple of weeks ago with Gavin Williamson, the former Sir Gavin Williamson. He became a Sir today. Former Defence Secretary and Education Secretary to Somaliland. And actually, the Somaliland story is really interesting. It's there's a massive diaspora, bit like the community who are trying to help Somalia. Somaliland is that there's a sort of 850 kilometers on the Horn of Africa of sea, in a really like Israel, in a difficult area. You've got Eritrea, you've got Ethiopia and the Tigray, you've got Al-Shabaab in Somalia, but this isn't a peaceful area, and they're looking for recognition and looking for certain things. And we went out, there were 4 of us, including Lord Lister, and it was striking, the similarities with Israel and with the community in terms of diaspora. And they're interested in talking on a number of levels, and it's fascinating going to places like that. It is a very poor country, but they are looking for international recognition. So where we can help, we can. We try to, and where there's an Israel angle, you can be sure I'll be there.
And on that note, in the Lords, what have been your finest moments? I mean, there must have been a lot of difficult points, especially in the lead up to the 2019 general election, when the anti-Semitism within the Labour Party was a huge issue, or other episodes in the upper chamber, or your work around that. Can you share any insights?
Yeah, well, I think things since certainly since I've been here, the debates on Israel and Jewish community matters have been actually much more balanced than one would imagine. There's a group of people, certainly a group for Israel led by Lord Turnberg, who's a Labour peer, and Lord Howard Lee, Lord Lee, Lord Munro Palmer, who's also a member of the United Synagogue, from the Liberal Democrats, Ruth Deitch. There's a whole group of people, and I've mentioned Jewish ones there. There are many non-Jewish peers who I've taken to Israel on many times. In my office here, I share with Eric Pickles, Lord Pickles, who we know by many in the community as one of our most solid and supportive friends. So actually, the debates have sort of changed. I was very much in awe in my early days because I would always listen to the late Rabbi Sachs and his contributions, and I've quoted him on many occasions since he sadly passed away to keep his words going. And I learned so much from him. So actually, the debates in the Lords are very interesting. And as I say, from an Israel and from a Jewish communal point of view, we can be content. There's a lot more to do and a lot more issues to raise, but I've done that. I remember, for a highlight for me was when I gave a speech after the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, and I was able to remind many of the relationship with the Cohen, with Stanley and Joy Cohen, but also the fact that he came to the opening of Hertsmere Jewish Primary School, the Duke of Edinburgh, and there were some funny incidences, and the kids sang "Hinei Ma Tov U'Manayim," which I quoted in its full in the house. I gave the Hansard people a bit of a tough one to do the Hebrew, and I was able to pay tribute in my way from that relationship that Stanley, the late Stanley, had. So having those occasions, and actually I never miss a sort of opportunity if there's an issue on genocide of the Uyghurs. I used Hanukkah when it was Hanukkah, or Purim when it was Purim, and I was able to raise these matters, which I do quite a lot. So I play my part from the Jewish community in the House of Lords.
And your Jewish identity has always been crucial to your approach to life. Can you share with us and the people listening in, what your Judaism has meant to you, and how it's directed your life story?
Well, it was, as I said right at the beginning, it was sort of ingrained. It was just part and parcel. I laugh now. I mean, we were, most of my friends in school in Liverpool were not particularly religious, and my friends would either ring me straight after Shabbat to tell me where they were going out, or they would drive around, park not too far away, walk around and say, meet here because that's where we'll all be. But we weren't particularly the most religious people, but it was all relative in there. But we were always just, I think it's part of being in a small community. You either get involved or you don't. We just got involved. My late father was chairman of the shul, was JNF. There was all the sorts of things that, in small communities you get involved. So it sort of rubs off, and it's sort of expected. And we continue. I'm pleased, for instance, that my daughter runs a charity, which is art. She's an art therapist for Jewish schools, for Jewish children in Jewish schools. So she's running this professionally, but. So it's continued in the tradition that we had in Liverpool. So it was always absolutely fundamental. I mean, as an example, when I was in Somaliland, and the president of Somaliland wanted to meet, and I said, the foreign minister came to pick me up, and I said, no, I have to wait till it's dark. When I see 3 stars, then you can take me to see. But they appreciated it. They respected it. There was no issue whatsoever. So I'm always a great believer in saying what I am, and I'm not shy about it at all.
And have you ever experienced anti-Semitism either in your professional life or more generally? I mean, have you come across that? Have you faced that challenge yourself?
The answer is yeah. I mean, online or emails or letter. Yes, over period. I've never had any physical attack or anything. But yeah, I'm a bit fortunate. I'm deaf in one ear, and I don't know. I mean, the work that CST do and the work that has to go on in the community, I totally support, and I've been involved in helping. But personally, no. I think people will respect you if you're open about what you believe and who you are.
And in terms of Anglo Jewry is really, run through your veins your whole life. We face many challenges. COVID, I think, exposed some of the existential challenges that we have in terms of the future of our synagogues. Here we're speaking at a United Synagogue event, And where do you see the future for our community in the UK? What are the challenges and what are the potential solutions to try and fortify and strengthen our community?
Well, I think the COVID has been very interesting. I mean, from our one's own example of going to shul or not going to shul during that period. I mean, I had a, you know, sadly, my when my father passed away, and saying Kaddish, of course, 3 times a day, whenever I could, even leaving the House of Lords, I used to get to Marble Arch Shul when I could, and it was always better to do a Mincha and Mariv together. You get 2 for the price of 1, and I tried, but here's the point. The last month of my Kaddish, I didn't say Kaddish because it was lockdown, and that was quite a shock in many ways. And I think that and we all experienced that period. We all went walking. I went walking in Boreham Wood and found things that I didn't even know existed, yards away from my own home. And we all did that walking. And then suddenly, this whole Shabbat morning service of the 3-hour United Synagogue type of service, I think, no doubt, you as a rabbi and the organisation are looking at, because people got used to either. And when you're in Hendon and others, where there were minyanim in every garden, and the small coming together. There is a great challenge for the community, and this, what we're doing tonight. 3 or 4 years ago, if you wanted to do this, it would have been in Radlett Shul Hall or some other shul hall, and 80, 50 something people would come. This has given a new opportunity to get into people's front rooms and engage. So there's good and bad, and most of us are zoomed out. But this sort of evening, no doubt, will have more people than you would have done on a rainy evening. So I think there's a big challenge for the shul community, for shul organization, for the United Synagogue itself. What's the future of the big shul? Is there a future? Is it better to? So I'm not an expert. I mean, I remember a number of years ago when I was asked would I consider being the chairman of the shul, and I told them that I'm involved in politics, but I am not qualified to be involved in shul politics. And so I've never really I've helped wherever I can in schools and whatever. But this is a big challenge, and I'm not sure I have the solutions. But there's going to be some sort of hybrid. There's going to be some sort of using what we're doing tonight and keeping close to people and hopefully getting back to some normality, as we called it, and so on. But I think there needs to be some conversation about the services and the length of services. But that's more you, Rabbi, than me.
I will keep my sermons to a minimum now.
I wasn't actually referring to sermons.
But no, I think you're right. I think that it can be very challenging to keep people's attention for a long time on a Shabbos morning. We found in Radlett, for example, and I've spoken to other colleagues in the organisation, that there are areas you can trim things down, legitimately trim things down, and not schlep certain parts of the service out so much. But it is a very challenging service. If you compare this to Christianity, if you look at the average Anglican service, on a Sunday morning, it's an hour, if that, and we've got a lot to fit in, to make it authentic. To make it authentic, to fulfill the obligations of the Shulchan Aruch about what we have to fulfill, but to try our best to cut the unnecessary bits out and to make it more powerful, and to accentuate the aspects of the service that are more meaningful to people.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we can calibrate. But no, it's interesting to hear that's something that really resonated with you, that we need to perhaps streamline some of the aspects of the service. And if you could you've had a life of so many achievements and so many interesting meetings and events. If you could leave some advice for a listening ear of what you've learned in terms of life generally, what would be a few thoughts on what you've learned during your journey that you could pass on to the next generation?
Well, I'll use the experience of Conservative Friends of Israel. What's made that a success is trips and relationships. The trips when we go to Israel. I mean, I've led somewhere like 150 trips to Israel over the years, of politicians, of candidates, and so on. And it's not so much what they see, but that's important. It's actually the shared experience you have with people. And if I use the example of the current Prime Minister as an example, that I think it'll become quite clear. In 2004, in November, I took a group of young new MPs to Israel. There was a guy called George Osborne. There was a guy called Boris Johnson. Teresa Villiers, who's the MP in Chipping Barnet, who's a great friend of the community, and Mark Francois. They were the four. And it's interesting how many you should take, and because it's about relationships. And the funny part of it is that Boris was actually giving a lecture on the Sunday evening, and we flew on the Sunday, so he didn't come till the Monday. And on the Monday morning, so George Osborne's first day in Israel ever, we were in Hertsmere having a discussion on counterterrorism, when I got a call to say that there'd been the suicide bomb in the Carmel market in Tel Aviv. And I came back in, I said, let's go to the Carmel market. I didn't know what we were going to see there. I didn't know we'd get anywhere near. But instead of having the academic discussion on counter, we went. And I will never forget, but nor will George Osborne, of standing in front of the burnt out stall. The Zaka people were doing what the Zaka people would do, and picking up parts. 3 or 4 people had sadly died. But the most fascinating part was the 2 stalls on either side were carrying on selling. We're not giving up. And there was this, that night on BBC or News or whatever, was George Osborne and Teresa Villiers. But that afternoon, I got another phone call while we're in Israel. And they said, "Is that Stuart Polak?" I said, "Yes." They said, "This is El Al Security at Heathrow." I said, "Oh, yes." They said, "Do you know where Mr. Johnson is?" So I said, "Well, he should be on the plane." So they said, "Well, everybody is on the plane except Mr. Johnson." Now, in those days, there's no doorkeepers and advisors and whatever. So I said, "Well, give me your number. I'll see if I can find him." So I called Boris, and I said, and he goes, Stuart. I said, "Boris, this is 2004. I said, where are you?" He said, "Heathrow." I said, "Well, that's good." I said, "But where?" He said, "Well, I'm in Smith's looking at the books." And I said, "Everybody else is on the plane waiting to fly. Can you get down to whatever gate?" He then joined us. And when he arrived that night, and he said, "What have I missed?" And we said everything, because of course that was the morning we'd been to the site of the suicide bomb. Boris was really inquisitive, and in fact had his press card, even though he was already an MP. And he said, I want to go, because it transpired that the suicide bomb had been done by a 16-year-old kid. He said, "I want to try and understand what's got into his mind, how it's affected him so much. I want to go and visit his parents." So I said, "Good luck." Of course, he didn't get anywhere near the house of the suicide bomber, and so on, and came back. But he was really, really inquisitive. And then we had the rest of the trip, and because at the time Boris was the shadow minister for culture, it was quite funny because the Israelis couldn't understand the shadow. What does shadow? I said, just call him minister. It's fine. And so Boris, shadow minister for culture, and we had a dinner that Thursday evening after all the Yad Vashem and other meetings in Knesset, whatever else. We then had dinner with something cultural, and it was with a guy called Yair Lapid. And I've been friendly with Yair ever since. And that night, and Boris and Yair were friendly. And it's those relationships from activities like that, which are, are so important and so relevant to this day. And the last CFI event we had just in December, we had a big lunch with the Prime Minister, and Yair Lapid as Foreign Minister flew over. And you could see the relationship, which one hopes will be good for Israel, good for the Jews here, and good for the community. And that really, what you ask me, it's about relationships that you build and keeping the relationships and hoping that one day those relationships will be relevant as per that example. But that is a bit of an extreme example. I do accept.
What are your future plans? In terms of what you're doing now and maybe over the next few years, do you have anything you can share with us?
Well, my main plan is to play with my grandchildren, which I like to do on most days and so on. I have 4, and no, my plan is to continue to do what I can for Israel, continue what I can do for in the House of Lords and make a difference. I got very involved in the domestic abuse bill. One of the things that I achieved was to ensure that children who experience, originally in the bill, it was going to children who are just sort of bystanders, watching, and I said they are victims if they are experiencing what's going on inside the home. So we got that into the bill. So things of that nature, which I are interested in. I'm sitting today on the Adult Social Care Committee. I was on the Justice Committee. So it's doing those sorts of things. But anything that I can do to continue to help the Abraham Accords thing I talked of earlier, to try and make those things work better. So all in all, I'm just going to try and continue to do what I do and support the community. And if I see there's a danger to shechita, or if I do whatever, I will do whatever I can, helping communal institutions to ensure that the life that we have in this country will continue, even with all the, as you started the whole evening, with the frightening stuff that's going on not very far away.
Absolutely. And now I guess you're doing this in a Lord Stuart Polak capacity, that you've transcended, the leading organizations, and now you've got that amazing opportunity to be that microphone for the community in your own right.
Well, I try to do it, and I repeat, I sort of pinch myself most days as I walk around in the House of Lords and think, okay, there's a lot of my teachers at King David School who'll be turning in their graves thinking, how the hell did he get there? But by the way, there's good news. I mean, we're beginning to challenge Eton, because David Wolfson, Lord Wolfson, who is the Justice Minister and doing a brilliant job, is also a King David pupil. So we're beginning to challenge the great schools of this country. So there's 2 of us now in the House of, and both Liverpool supporters. So there we go.
The more the merrier, or v'chein
Absolutely.
yirbu, as we say in Hebrew.
Absolutely.
Well, we're almost at the hour now, so I just wanted to say thank you so much, Lord Stuart Polak, for joining us. I hope that everyone's enjoyed that, what would have been a more fireside chat, but I think it's been really insightful and interesting nonetheless, even though you're in Westminster in the House of Lords offices, and I'm here in Radlett. But I think that it's another conversation that can educate us and can give us so much in terms of the richness of experience. And I think that you are so right in your analysis that it's the people make the party, and it's about those relationships and what you've done in terms of improving relations with this country in Israel and other countries in Israel has been phenomenal. And I guess it shows you that people, you can achieve this. And
I was just thinking what in your words there. I mean, it's good. I keep saying this. I mean, people will say, "Well, you're conservative," and you would say it. But the people sitting around today, the cabinet table, almost to a man and a woman, are warm towards Israel. Have most of them been to Israel, either through CFI over the period or individually. It's as good as I remember it. Now, of course, sad, we've had COVID and the focus on there, and we have the terrible situation we have in the Ukraine. There's no great bandwidth, but I can assure you that there are people sitting around the cabinet table who care about the relations with Israel. And that is, to me, perhaps the most important thing. And that has to be built amongst all political parties and the organizations, whether it's Labour Friends of Israel or Liberal or whatever. These are important organizations who build those relationships. And as you rightly said earlier on, the 2019 election, I'm quite sure was a blip in the Labour Party of what was going on there. But people stood firm. Chief Rabbi Mervis led by and really led the community, and it was really important. And the result that came through was important for us as a community and for Britain in general. So these are organisations and that need support and need to grow and to go from strength. But my final point: the people sitting around today, they care about Israel, which is tremendous.
Mm. It is incredible. In the United Kingdom, it's not the same as America with the strong millions of Jewish people, and also the evangelical movement, which is very pro-Israel. In this country, we are a tiny minority, and we are, we could be seen as an endangered species. We are small in number, and we have to be able to have that representation. So thank you on behalf of the community for all that you do to represent our interests and to protect that which we hold dear. So thank you so much, Stuart, for this evening.
Oh, and the final bit, the good news is after 42 minutes, Boreham Wood are still 0-0 with Everton. So
I know
anything can happen. I've just put it on now. Don't want you to think I've been watching while I've been talking. Can't do that.
Well, I hope that it will be a Liverpool Boreham Wood final. And
how wonderful would that be?
Yeah, hopefully. So on that note, over and out. Thank you so much again.
All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.